Hey everybody, this is Gilbert, and you're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast.
You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast, established 2019. Direct from the North Wales coast, his verbal skills definitely outweigh his wrestling ability. It's time for British Wrestling's sharpshooter, your host, Stu Palmer.
It's episode 49. We are back local. We've been across the pond for weeks now, but we are back to North Wales, and it's the former founder, owner of Britannia Wrestling Promotions, Mr. Steve Saxon. Prior to being a promoter, Steve was a wrestler. He was a wrestler for many years, and he was trained by the great Welshman himself, El Bandito Orig Williams. A real in-depth look into promoting, booking, cost. I asked him quite a lot of stuff, so we get a real in-depth interview with Mr. Saxon. Steve founded it in 2008, before the surge on the British scene. There's so many promotions now in Britain per mile, per square mile, however you want to look at it. He was doing it before it was the in thing. Business was a lot different back then, so you get to hear about that. The stars he brought over: Jay Lethal, El Generico, we know him as Sami Zayn, Robbie E, so many that he brought over, and the influx of local talent. There was a big ethos to have the local talent. It wasn't just about booking names all the time, name people from the States, worldwide. I wanted to get Steve on for a long time. It was great to get it done. So without further ado, I'll stop rambling. It's episode 49, Stu's Wrestling Podcast, with the former owner, promoter, founder of Britannia Wrestling Promotions, BWP, Mr. Steve Saxon. Enjoy. Team UK. Right, it is my honour, and what a privilege to have Mr. Steve Saxon, former promoter, owner of BWP, Britannia Wrestling Promotions, ambassador for PWI, which is Pro Wrestling International, and the host of the ISAX podcast, wrestling podcast, might I add. How's it going, mate?
Yeah, good, Stu. Good to finally be on.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure, as I said. Absolute pleasure to have you on. I appreciate you sparing the time. I know you're a busy man. And I think first things first, just going into something current, how has lockdown been for you?
Busy. Weirdly, not a lot of change for me personally. Obviously, outside of the wrestling industry, I run my own pub in Penaford, North Wales, the Red Lion. Over lockdown, we spent the duration of lockdown doing home deliveries for the vulnerable, those that are isolating, and for the NHS as well. So we were actually, ironically, busier than ever during lockdown, and then since we've reopened after lockdown, the business has been absolutely crazy here in North Wales.
It's great to see the sense of the community with the pub as well. Obviously, I see what you post. It's nice. It's really nice to see, mate, honestly, and how you've been helping people out through this tough time.
There's no, I'm nearly 40 years old, and I've lived all over the place throughout my lifetime, and I've never, ever experienced a community like the Penaford community. I've been living here now for just over 10 years, and the community spirit in this area is absolutely amazing, especially in times of need, you know, when somebody locally in need, especially during the lockdown era, the way that the community came out to help each other out was absolutely amazing.
It's a testament to you and the staff, mate. Honestly, I am catering myself, so I understand, you know, what you know, it's a tall order sometimes, isn't it, what we do? But yeah, lovely.
It is, absolutely, it is, yeah.
Really lovely. Right, I'm going to get on to wrestling now, Sax. When did you first start watching pro wrestling? I always lead with this one. This is always my first question.
I don't recall a stage in my life where I didn't watch wrestling. My parents were avid World of Sport fans, ITV, Channel 3, Saturday afternoon, religiously every week. They'd rush home from the pub at 3 o'clock, chippy dinner on a Saturday, and then we would sit in front of the TV and watch the likes of Big Daddy, Haystacks, Cat Weasel. And then but my first real memory of really embracing wrestling was when I was 4 years old, randomly flicking through the 4 TV channels that we had back in the 80s, and coming across this something that was familiar but different. I knew it was a wrestling show, but it looked nothing like anything I'd seen before. And it turned out to be I was watching for the first time the Immortal Hulk Hogan on WWF programming. And from that day, religiously every week without fail. I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked on the world of wrestling. But no actual first memory as such. I just remember that wrestling was always around me. As with everybody, most people, most families in the 80s, Saturday afternoon was the prime time slot, and it's what nearly every family in Britain used to tune into, and my family was no different.
Obviously, you've listed some guys there. Which wrestlers captivated you?
I'd say it'd be same as, and it's probably no different these days. It's, the person that's in the limelight the most, which back then was Big Daddy, easily Big Daddy. This big, burly bloke who kind of reminded me a little bit of my old man as well, in physical stature, with the big top hat and the white leotard and the big Union Jack cape. And back then I thought it was amazing. And obviously, in hindsight, you watch some of these clips back on YouTube, and wrestling was a completely different world back then. But yeah, as a kid, I loved Big Daddy. But I think every kid in Britain loved Big Daddy.
Did any matches stand out for you to this day? Going back to then, any matches that you could watch now and that they still hold up today? Maybe that was something I like to ask.
Yeah. These will be matches that I've watched since, not necessarily matches that I remember from actually being a kid. Johnny Saints. Obviously, I've got to work with Johnny a number of times over recent years, and when I was coming up through the ranks, Johnny was always about the shows that I trained at for Orig Williams. But I can quite easily, and I have done on numerous occasions, gone back and watched Johnny Saint matches, and he was well ahead of his time, Sainty. And he can still go now to this day. I wouldn't like to hazard too much of a guess, but he's got to be somewhere in the region of 70 years old, probably a little bit more. And I've seen him go. And he's still got it, even at this age, because he keeps himself in proper good shape. He's proper trim. He's agile. His mind's still completely there. So, yeah, from a kid, I remember seeing Sainty since growing up and the YouTube coming out, and I've been able to watch Sainty again. It was also an honour to actually meet, train with and work with Sainty over the years as well.
He's local to us, isn't he, Johnny Saint?
He is, yeah. He actually lives in Rill. He lives in Rill,
yeah. That's cool.
I think a lot of the old school wrestlers have either lived in or temporarily resided in Rill, because after ITV World of Sport finished, the guy that trained me and promoted me, El Bandito Orig Williams, he had his Welsh TV show called Wrestler, which was on S4C.
Absolutely, remember it well.
So he took all those people that were dropped by ITV World of Sport, and he brought a lot of them over to North Wales, the likes of William Regal, Fit Finlay, Sainty, obviously. Giant Haystacks lived in Rill for a while, and one of Orig's properties after the days of ITV World of Sport. Haystacks was one of Orig's rent collectors or debt collectors, one of the two, as well as obviously wrestling on his Welsh TV show as well. So you'd be amazed the amount of wrestlers that have come through North Wales, particularly Rill, over the years.
Got a bit of history along the coast, haven't we, to be fair? In all fairness, I'd say we're on the map, like, absolutely. Did any pay-per-view stand out for you, Sax? I'm obviously going to say WWF, WWE. Did you like a particular pay-per-view event that was put on, or did it not bother you as such?
As a child?
Yeah, as a child, I think. Yeah, going back a bit.
As a child, I think the main ones, as with everybody, were your WrestleMania, your SummerSlam, your Rumble, your Survivor Series. They were the four only pay-per-views. But one of my earliest memories of an actual pay-per-view, I think, was SummerSlam 91, where you had Bret Hart against Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental title. The Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth got married. Hogan and the Warrior faced off against the Triangle Terror, I think they were called, Slaughter, Adnan and Mustafa, with Sid Justice making his first WWE appearance as a special guest referee. It was, I don't know, I've watched that show back so many times, especially as a kid, when you didn't have a lot of choice. You literally just watch the same video cassette over and over again. But even as an adult, I've gone back and rewatched that entire show. I've watched certain matches or certain segments from that show. I also remember the segment with the Big Boss Man, or the match with the Big Boss Man and the Mountie, the prison match, where the loser went to prison for the night. So they had the match early on, and then for the rest of the night they kept on cutting back, which is quite new for that time, for 1991, the early 90s, to have a segment that was continuously rolling throughout the entire show until that moment where you actually see the Mountie being locked up in prison. So for me, that was one of my all-time favourite pay-per-views as a child.
Cool, man. That's cool. I'm going to get to you now. what triggered you to begin starting training? You've obviously touched upon Orig. I know from research and what you sent me, Orig trained you. How did that come to fruition, the training and starting your training?
Complete luck. I was born in Stoke-on-Trent. I moved to North Wales when I was 15 years old. And from holidaying in North Wales over the summer seasons as a child, I knew that there was a wrestling show in Rhyl, but that's all that I knew. So literally one of the first things I did when I moved to Wales is I wrote a handwritten letter saying that it was my lifelong dream, I want to become a wrestler. And I addressed the letter, put a stamp on it, I addressed the letter to the wrestling show, Rhyl, and literally that was it. Put it in the post, thought nothing more of it. And then a few weeks later, when I was coming back from my part-time job at the time, my mum greeted me at the door with a bit of paper in hand with a number on saying, "The Wrestling Federation's phoned you. You need to phone her back straight away." And obviously she thought she meant the World Wrestling Federation, which it was. And I phoned up the number and Orig Williams answered and gave him my name. And he said, right, okay. I don't know why, but I get dozens of these letters every single week and they always go in the bin, but yours stood out to me. And they invited me along to the Rhyl summer season that started in July. And I went, walked up onto the first floor of the Rhyl Town Hall, saw this wrestling ring for the first time, got told to jump straight into the wrestling ring, which was an amazing feeling for the first time as a 16-year-old kid. And then I got a bloke, one of Orig's star attractions of the 80s and early 90s, Boston Blackie, hell of a man, hell of a worker. He started just showing me the ropes, a little bit of rough and tumble as it was back then. And then literally later that night, they asked me what gear I had, and I think at the time combat pants were in fashion. I had combat pants and a pair of Timberland boots or something like that. They wouldn't have been Timberland, not back then. I couldn't afford that back then. And he said, "Right, whip your top off. You're in the Battle Royal tonight." So my first experience with wrestling was being trained for a best part of an hour, sitting around watching the show, and then being thrown in the probably 16, 17-man Battle Royal at the end of the night. And amazing. And the best way. I mean, I know these days things have changed, and for obvious reasons, things have changed when it comes to training schools. But for me back then, that was definitely the best way. It was the last of the old guard. I was a rookie 16-year-old kid, and the best way to train these rookies was just literally throw them into the deep end. And fortunately for me, I was asked back the following week.
Cool, that's cool. Who were you tearing it up with during that time in the early stages?
A lot of random names. Boston Blackie was the main guy. You had guys like Gary Beware, who's from Prestatyn. You had guys like Frankie Sloan. Frankie Sloan and I had we had quite a few matches. So he was probably the closest to my age at that time. He'd done bits of World of Sport and what have you, towards the tail end of it. He was very well thought of by the hierarchy and the old guard. We actually, this was during this stage of doing British wrestling had dried up, World of Sport had dried up. There were a lot of bitter old school wrestlers that were still on the scene. The money wasn't as good as it used to be for obvious reasons because they weren't on TV. WWE had come in, they'd taken over, they monopolised the system. And it was ironic that those people that blamed WWE for changing the system and for kind of begin breaking kayfabe at that stage, we as workers could only make our money by doing WWF tribute shows, which is exactly what it says in the tin, no different than an ABBA tribute band. We would go out there dressed as your favourite WWF superstars. And at the time, I was Jeff Hardy. The Hardy Boys were very, very popular at the time, Team 2 Extreme. And I was teamed up, so I was Jeff Hardy and Frankie was Matt Hardy. So we did that gimmick on and off for about 2, maybe 3 years. So I got to work with Frankie a hell of a lot.
Great talent as well. Incredible.
To this day,
Can still go. Absolutely, mate. How did the business differ back then, as it pertains to being a wrestler to how it is now? How was the business back then, basically? Yeah.
Well, I said, I was one of the final few young ones, if you like, which I was back then. I was 16, 17 years old. That was allowed to enter the locker room and the business at that stage where it was run by the old guard, who were very protective because they had World Sport TV contracts pulled from underneath the feet. The WWE had been monopolising and changing the system completely, breaking kayfabe to an extent which was unheard of before then. So they were very protective. So I was honoured, and I was very, very lucky as well that Orig kind of took me under his wing. And Orig is was one of the most respected wrestlers and promoters and personalities in British wrestling ever. And because he took me under his wing, it made my life a little bit easier. I didn't get ribbed as much by the boys, and they trained me rather than trying to hurt me, which did go on quite a lot back then. You know, there were a lot more physical back then. There were a lot more receipts given back then for very minor reasons. But I got my fair share, but I kind of bypassed that. But I think I also saw that was a grafter. I was hard work. I was always the first one at the show to put the ring up, which was a bastard of a job, especially at a real town hall. I'd do a match. Sometimes I did 2 matches. I did the rumble at the end, and then I did the last one to leave after I'd taken the ring down. And I was paid £5 for that honour as well, which I was told back then that I was lucky to get anyway. But regardless if I was paid or not, I still would have been there every single week. First one there, last one to leave, without a doubt. But the business was, like I said, it was completely different in terms that they were very protective. The business wasn't as open back then as it is now. There was no internet. There was no social media. Even to the point now, as you mentioned before at the beginning of the show, I used to run Britannia Wrestling Promotions, and I did so for nearly 13 years. Whereas now we will have a private Facebook page or a WhatsApp group set up where we'll put the show bills, the running order for the shows in advance so the talent can get their heads around it and they know what's going to be promoted online before the actual show. Back then, you would literally turn up. You could turn up at 7:20 with the show starting at 7:30, and already sit there with a little slip of paper and go, right, who's here? Right, Saxon, you're on with Boston Blackie, you're on first. You've got 5 minutes, get ready, work out yourself, Blackie's going over. And you'd have 5 minutes to work out your match. Whereas these days, you get a lot longer. You're getting at least a week, usually months, to actually see where your storylines are going, you know what matches you're going to be involved in. Storylines, nothing. There were never storylines back then. They were literally show by show, which a lot of people still operate like that now as well, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it was quite refreshing to step from Orig's world of wrestling promoting into my own world of wrestling promoting. When I started BWP in 2008, one of the things I said I was going to focus on was storytelling. And as the years went on, that became one of our strongest points of Britannia Wrestling Promotions, was the storytelling that we did, the characters that we built, and the wrestlers that we helped to develop. They're definitely the 3 strong attributes of Britannia Wrestling Promotions, which did stem from my experience with Orig Williams, but I wanted to do a little bit more, wanted to modernise British wrestling shows, and I think over time, and I'm certainly not saying it was down to me or Britannia Wrestling Promotions, we just kind of followed the same curve, but everybody, all the new promotions were kind of doing the same thing, where they wanted to change certain things. They wanted to change the sort of characters they booked compared to the old school. They wanted to not just be a show-by-show, match-by-match promotion. They wanted to be a promotion that sold tickets on selling stories. And look where we are now. Look how amazingly massive the British wrestling scene is now as a result of that.
It's incredible. It's absolutely, it's crazy. These young lads coming through now are so lucky. So many places to work. Just exploded, didn't it? But going back to BWP, Steve, how hard was it initially setting the promotion up? What challenges did you face in the early?
A lot of challenges. It was always scoffed upon for anybody to dare step away from the wrestling promotions they started with in order to set up their own wrestling promotion. Now, I did it naively, but I think in hindsight it was probably still the best decision I made. But naively at the time, I thought, I'm going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and I'm going to run a one-off show that somebody offered. Somebody approached me about running a show in a local community hall in Llandurnog in North Wales, tiny little community, and it was a maximum capacity of 156 people. So I thought, there's no greater time. So I hired a ring from Texas Joe Savoldi, and I did it very subtly, very quietly, on the assumption it was only going to be a one-off show, and I enjoyed it that much that I decided it was going to be, I'll do another one. Enjoyed that. I'd do another one. And then started the phone calls, the threats. Orig and I did have words. He actually, unlike others that decided to phone me or probably MSN messaged me at the time, Orig actually came and met me outside my workplace at the time in Rutland. He parked up and I sat in his car, and he was straight to the point. I had shit on him, on our friendship, I suppose, an element of friendship. And I was basically unprofessional. And you know what? In hindsight, I completely agree. I was. What a man would have done was gone and spoke to Orig, told him of my intentions, and gone and done it. He would have shot me down straight away and said no. And then it would have been ultimately my decision to go, well, I'm going to do it anyway, or am I not? Otherwise, we may not be sat here and be having this conversation right now if I'd gone that route. But naively, because of my age at the time, I was, 25 years old when I did my first show. But when he found out, he wasn't best pleased. But then when we sat there for an hour or so in his car with his wife, Wendy, and I put my side across of why I wanted to promote. And I could see that for an old school hard man, and he was a very, very hard man, physically, mentally, emotionally, I think he started to see and sense that, hold on, that this he's got good intentions and he's doing it for the right reasons. And so we came to an agreement that I would run shows east of Wrexham, basically Wrexham into the English border, and I would not step on his toes anywhere in North or Mid Wales. And I was happy with that. I thought it was a fair compromise. And his final words to me was, you know my name, so you know my number, you know where I am. If you ever need anything, you call me. And then he shook my hand. And that was the last time that I saw or spoke to Orig Williams, unfortunately, because he passed away less than 12 months later. But that was just the Orig stage. I've also had a lot of Stu, which I've never really spoke about before. Stu, it's kind of an exclusive for you, but something that, as I do get back into the world of podcasting, that's something I'm going to elaborate on a little bit more, is all-star wrestling that were terrible, unprofessional, horrible, nasty bastards when it came to a young upstart wrestling promoter who had worked within the industry for 8 years, I suppose, 10 years at that time, thereabouts. And I did no different than what Brian Dixon himself did. Now, this is a story that's out there in the public domain, but Brian Dixon started his career as a referee for Orig Williams over in Wales. Orig's main draw at the time, which is, again, he was ahead of his time sometimes, Orig was, and with female wrestling, he was really ahead of his time. Women like Klondike Kate and Mitzi Muller, the wife of Brian Dixon, was Orig's main attraction. And Mitzi and Brian, the story has it, and I believe I've read this in Orig Williams' book as well, I believe, they started seeing each other. And then, for whatever reason, Brian decided, after a period of time of working for Orig shows and learning the ropes, that he wanted to start up his own wrestling promotion. And he went and he did that, big time wrestling, all-star wrestling, Super Slam, whatever it was branded at the time, but 50 years ago now. And he and Orig fell out. They had words, they fell out. Orig believed that Brian was being unprofessional and shitting on the shoes of Orig. And by not only starting his own promotion, but by naturally, because his partner, Mitzi, was going to be appearing on Brian's shows as well as Orig's. And I believe she did. I believe she worked both shows. She didn't pick a side, but Orig and Brian had fallen out. But they fell out for a number of years. But when they eventually saw sense and saw, well, this is just the natural progression of anybody in the business, they want to further develop and advance themselves. And they became friends again. And they started working together. And a lot of my shows I worked on were a collaboration between Orig and Brian Dixon. And they were good shows. But my point being that for Brian to experience what I was going through with Orig Williams, and particularly with Orig Williams, and then I was getting the phone calls from a member of his family, should we say, basically throwing every threat at me that they possibly can to try and stop me from running shows. And back then, I was an impressionable, naive kid. I was a kid. And I used to take it. I carried on running shows, but there's a part of me that was a little bit fearful, I suppose. I suppose that's the word. I was fearful that my lifelong dream was going to be pulled from underneath my feet by the person who did exactly the same as me 40 years prior with exactly the same person. And they got over it. And they got over it, became close friends. And I'd like to think that if Orig had was still around now, that he would have been not involved in my shows, not involved with Britannia shows, but would have at least come and would have enjoyed what he actually saw. But unfortunately, I'll never get the opportunity to know if that's true or not. But I'd like to think that. But yeah, so in the early days, I got quite a lot of hate. I did, but I don't know why, because I was impressionable. I was naive. I was weak to some extent. But I carried on ploughing through. And I think that's what's helped me to be the person that I am today. I'm a lot stronger, more confident person. I think that's part of getting older as well, Stu. I think you kind of lose you get old, which isn't always about. Sometimes, no. Always.
Stood your ground, Sax, by the sounds of it.
I did without realising, I think, at the time. Yeah. It didn't stand my ground, but obviously, well, Britannia's still going, you know. With or without me, Britannia's still going.
What's your relationship like with Brian Dixon in the present? That's what I was going to ask. I'd do it chronologically, but I'll just come, because we were speaking about Brian Dixon.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't have a relationship with Brian Dixon.
Right, okay.
Nor with... I've always got on well with his son-in-law, Dean. Dean, Allmark and I, we shared many locker rooms and tours of Ireland and what have you for Oric Williams. And I think we've literally travelled. We've been in every country in the UK together. We've certainly wrestled in Scotland, England, Ireland, and Wales. And I've had a great relationship with him, working relationship. And we are Facebook friends. We're Facebook friends. We interact with likes and comments here and there, but that's the extent of it. But Brian Dixon, I have no relationship with at all. Further down the line, I would like to think, as now that I'm hitting a certain age and I've been in the business for such time, almost coming up to 25 years nearly. I think I'm getting to that age where these wrestlers reunion days, I think I'm going to start going to them at some point, just to see some old faces. And then I hope that our paths do cross. I hope that we can be respectful, professional, but also very honest towards each other. And who knows where the relationship may go from there. But at this moment in time, as it has always been, the only communication I had with All Stars was in those first 4 to 5 years, pretty much the same time every year leading up to the summer season. But they were not a pleasant experience at all. Until the last phone call where I did start standing up for myself and told them that I was going to be running shows regardless, that was the end of the phone calls. And that was the last communication I ever had with All Star Wrestling.
What threats were made, if you can go into them? You said about threats earlier.
Open book, completely open book.
Yeah, just I thought I'd ask. I'd like to know now.
There were threats of sending certain talent to our shows to disrupt. We were always accused of ripping their posters down because they used to run, only in the summer season, Rill Town Hall after Oric Williams passed away. We ran Prestatyn pretty much every other week, at worst once a month, but we did that 12 months of the year, and we did it for a number of years. We were the local promotion. Their promotion had been there for longer, just for shorter spells. 2 completely different towns, several miles apart, complete different catchment of clientele. We focused on the locals, and sometimes we get some of the tourists in. They targeted solely the tourists that were going to Rill. Our posters would cross paths, but I can honestly say this, hand on heart, on all of my children's lives, as I used to tell them every single year during the phone calls, I have never instructed anybody, nor asked anybody, nor told anybody to take down or cover up an All Stars poster or any wrestling promotions poster. What I have said is that if they've got a poster here on the billboard advertising Tuesday nights on Rill, there's nothing wrong with putting a Britannia one next to it advertising Saturday nights in Prestatyn. 2 good quality shows, miles apart, but still local. Why can't people enjoy both? That was always my impression, still is to this day. Collaboration is the key. I've always said that. Collaboration is this industry to move forward. So we were always accused of ripping their posters down, which would always generate the phone calls, which would be, we're going to send people around to the shows. We hope that your books are in order. We hope you're above board. We believe you haven't got insurance. And everything they were saying, I just let them say. One, out of respect, I didn't want to answer back too much, but I knew that I was completely covered. We were fully legit and above board. Of course, we had the relevant insurances. And I knew, even if nobody else knew, I knew that I was never taking any of the posters down. So yeah, we were threatened from everything from physically to legally to HMRC. We were threatened. Everything was thrown at us that they possibly could. And I think it got to the point, like I said before, where because I did start standing up for myself during these phone calls, and they could see that Saxon's carrying on these shows. So as the Rill Town Hall numbers were dwindling, and the Britannia numbers were increasing, I can understand their frustration, but maybe that's a sentiment to, well, our show was more relatable to the North Wales audience. They wanted to see the younger stars coming through that were starting off as rookies, and they were watching and witnessing the developmental and growth of these young guys. But also going back to we were doing the storylines. We were doing shows on a regular 2, 3 or 4 week basis all year round. From July through till the end of August, we were doing a show every Saturday night at Britannia, as well as shows all around the North Wales coast. We were literally everywhere. So I do fully understand and appreciate their frustration, but there's no need to go down the route. Why not look at, well, maybe we can do something with Britannia rather than trying to fight us, which inevitably turns out that we're still running Britannia North Wales and All Stars not so much in real. Maybe things could have been different if they were a little bit more open towards progressing and modernising their side of the business along with ours. Well, who knows? Who knows?
I'm going to go back to BWP now, and obviously from its inception, was it a big cost to yourself getting it started up, the promotion? I'd like to know from a promoter's standpoint, pick your brains about that a little bit, because I wouldn't know. I'm just a fan, aren't I? So yeah, just starting up BWP in terms of cost, was it tough initially?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got the your cost of. I didn't own a ring back then. I hired a ring, and I did that for a number of shows before. A good friend of mine, who's an old wrestler, and he also used to have a number of rings. He was a ring maker. Dave Duke, or Dave Doghead, as he's more commonly known in the scene. He gifted me a ring that I could use for as long as I needed. It wasn't the best ring in the world. It was made out of old bits of scrap metal, scaffolding bars. Boards used to move around like the sea. Collapsed once in Silverdale and Stoke-on-Trent during the show, which was interesting. But we got around it somehow. Yeah, and of course, I mean, back then I didn't have the wrestlers' wages in the band, but you were relying on the door. Somehow, we always managed to do it. We always managed to make enough money on the night to pay all the wrestlers, pay their expenses, to pay the rent, to pay the guy that was driving the van. And then slowly over time, we started having a bit of a surplus of money, and it just became a bit easier. We ended up buying our own wrestling ring. We then decided, years later, we decided to open up our own training school, which brought in another revenue of money for us. So we were able to invest into things like a steel cage for the ring, which obviously then helped to improve our status locally. We could hold regular steel cage matches, which we did, sometimes too much, but we did, and it used to bring in the crowds. And yeah, it was a slow progression, but from the start, because I had so long to plan and prepare for that first ever show, because that first ever show was a sold show where a local community group paid me to host the show. They paid me a set amount so that they would take the ticket money to raise money for their local charity or the cause, whatever it was. That made things a lot easier. But yeah, it's not cheap to start up a wrestling promotion. It's not cheap at all.
In the early days, which talents, wrestlers were you reliant on when you were building the promotion? Who was the focal point in terms of your storylines and your matches? That was going to be my next one.
Well, I kind of leaned on an old school wrestler called Texas Joe Saboldi. He used to run the Preston Haven site, and I did quite a few shows for him. I used to do the booking for him for a year or so for those shows. So I knew he had a network of younger wrestlers that wouldn't have necessarily been seen in North Wales before, the likes of Tommy Gunn, who was well ahead of his time back then, the Hunter brothers, who are still going to this day and still, in my personal opinion, one of the best natural tag teams in Britain. Probably one of the only tag teams made up of two brothers where they haven't had this separation, split up angle, which is nice to see. They're consistent. They're really, really good lads. I also used a lot of local talent that they did start training with Orig, but didn't feel that they fit in with Orig's locker room of the old guard. Brad Matthews, who lasted a couple of years in wrestling, had promise, but now he went on to MMA, and he did really, really well in MMA. Who else did he? And also I'd used Texas Joe Saboldi because he added that old school element to the show. The Myatts, Keith Myatt, and his son Ryan Myatt, who again, they're both still on the scene. How Keith is still on the scene, I don't know. He's got to be like 90 years old by now, surely. Keith and I have a long relationship going back to my childhood. His family and my family were from the same part of Stoke-on-Trent.
Yeah.
His family and my family knew each other. Some of them used to hang around together. And when I first got in with Oric Williams, Keith was working for Oric shows on a regular basis. He was part of the tag team gimmick. I can't remember what it was at the time. But anyway, and he kind of, when he realised the Stoke connection, he kind of put me under his wing, showed me a few tricks. And Keith Meyer is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and one of the most professional guys you'll ever meet. So I'm somebody like that looking out for me and taking me under his wing, showing me the ropes, not just what in the ring, but about locker room etiquette as well. That really helped me. And so when I started my promotion, I thought it was only right that I want, well, not only just to return the favour, because he was a great talent as well, and he still is. You know, for a guy that's been around as long as he has with the experience he's got, he's still a great talent to have on shows. But I thought I need to repay that favour. So he was definitely a mainstay on the early days of BWP.
It's cool, man. It's cool. Obviously, you attracted some big names, international stars over the years. I probably can't remember all of them, but I remember seeing Sami Zayn, El Generico, Jay Lethal. I've actually met the two of them in the States, actually, but it's not about me. Who else did you have? Doug Williams, when I came to a show.
Williams, yeah.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Yeah, Sami Zayn, I think it was like 2011, I think. He was the first ever one that we had, his first ever import, and at the time he was working El Generico. Sorry to break kayfabe for those that didn't know, but and what a guy. He actually stayed in my house in Pennyford. That's where I'm in Pennyford, and I'm in my office in the pub. So literally just around the corner, he stayed in Pennyford, which is always my go-to story. Or there's any young wrestling fans in talking about Sami Zayn, that, do you know that he's actually stayed in Pennyford? But we've had Dougie Williams, you said, great talent. David Richards, he was on with CJ Banks. What a match. That match is on YouTube, I believe, or it should still be on the Britannia YouTube. Check that one out. It's an amazing match. And we had the American, Davey came back a few years later as part of the American Wolves when they were TNA tag champions against the YOLO squad. And that was in Denby Town Hall. That, again, was a fantastic match. We've had Rob Terry, Robbie E. Who else have we had? We've had loads. I mean, even Raven came to do a training session at BWP once. Loads, just so many, so many. You forget we've literally had that many. It's crazy how many people we've had. I'd say probably my favourite one in terms of, and I'll hand hat off. Most of them, 9 out of 10 of them, were genuinely good people that would go out of their way to watch other people's matches, to give honest critiques and feedbacks. Would stick around that little bit longer just to make sure that the fans got a few signatures when they were paid to do that and they were expected to do that. Most of them were generally good blokes. But my favourite was Jay Lethal. Jay Lethal, his match with Dylan Roberts as part of I think it was the summer season finale. It may have been the first or the second summer season, but it's on YouTube. What a match that was. It was absolutely immense. Dylan Roberts, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated and underutilised talents in Britain. A lot of it through his own personal choice, because his personal life and his career. But the match he had with Jay Lethal, you could have put that on WWE, NXT, Ring of Honor, New Japan TV, any of those, and it would have stole the show. What an amazing talent that guy is.
The lads have had on, obviously, have had Drill on last year. Loves Dylan. Said, obviously, he's got his day job, hasn't he? Loves his day job. Obviously, I've never spoke to Dylan. You know him very, very well. You're good pals. Why do you think he didn't go full-time? Was it the love of being a paramedic?
I think it was. And the fact that he's got a young family.
Yeah.
I mean, Dylan Roberts, I'm not going to, I'll save that for, you definitely need to get Dylan Roberts on your podcast.
I want to get him on. He's on the list, mate, I tell you.
Yeah, good. He's got some interesting stories to tell. But he's a national treasure. He's a national hero. He's fought in Afghanistan. He was on the front line for many years. Came back, started a young family at the same time as he was getting into the wrestling business. And then he worked as a care worker, worked in a factory, all at the same time, whilst studying to become a paramedic and being one of the best wrestlers in Britain. And now he is a full-time paramedic. He is literally one of our national NHS heroes. And he still continues to give 100% of the wrestling. But I think if WWE had offered him the contract, or any of the big companies had offered him the contracts, I genuinely think that he would not take it. Dylan and I have been good friends, best friends for a number of years now. He's like a brother to me. And I know we've had this little thing at BWP where we're supposed to get into a match together, but Dill's a good person, and he's always going to put his family and his career first. And I don't think that'd be any difference even if WWE came knocking.
It's that age-old question that we all ponder: is wrestling fixed? This is Bill Apter, and my answer to that is I didn't know it was broken. So many of you know me from my days back at the classic wrestling magazines, and a lot of you from OneWrestling.com and OneWrestlingVideo.com. But I always get questions about various things I did through the years to propel my career to where it is today as the world's most recognizable journalist in pro wrestling. What was my relationship with the McMahons? Was I the guy who started that feud between the actor, comedian Andy Kaufman and Jerry the King Lawler? What is Ric Flair really like? Who are my favorites? Well, all this and more answered in my book that you can get online or at your favorite book dealer called Is Wrestling Fixed? I Didn't Know It Was Broken. It's a great read, got great views, and hopefully you'll be picking it up soon too. So the answer to Is Wrestling Fixed? You know it now. I Didn't Know It Was Broken. This is Bill Apter, and I'll see you at the matches.
GTG, often imitated but never duplicated. Kind of broad at the shoulder, narrow at the hip. No other promotion give us any lip. We the best of the best, the beasts of the East. SOS, simply out of sight. GTG.
What he said, good times guaranteed.
Which matches, you've obviously touched upon Jay Lethal and Dylan, which matches in BWP, I know there's been hundreds, maybe thousands of matches over the years, through your 12, 13 years, which were some of your favourite matches?
So obviously I've already said the Jay Lethal, Dylan Roberts. Again, as I touched upon before, the YOLO squad against the American Wolves, because what a contrast of tag teams. You had the youth of the YOLO squad, who were literally half the physical size of the American Wolves. The American Wolves came in as the big TNA television tag team champions, and the YOLO squad were both local lads from North Wales wrestling in Denby Town Hall in North Wales. And what a match that was. And the fact that the Wolves went out of their way, unscripted at the end of the match, and made a big speech about how the YOLO squad surprised them. They weren't expecting what they brought to the table. And one day they hope to be having a return match, but on TNA or some TV show. And I know that really affected the young lads. And obviously both the YOLO squad, Drew Parker and Ethan Silver, both went on to do their own individual things. Drew's over in Japan now. He's loving the deathmatch scene. Ethan Silver disappeared somewhere into the wilderness. Not quite sure what happened to him, but no doubt he's done something good in his wrestling career down the line. Other great matches against CJ Banks, David Richards. A lot of imports here. It's not always imports to make the best matches, but they're the ones that stand out immediately in my head. Yeah. I've seen other great matches. Any match that involves Zach Gibson and Pitbull, Zach Gibson and Dylan Roberts, Zach Gibson and CJ Banks, and then CJ Banks. Any match with CJ Banks and Dylan Roberts, CJ Banks and Pitbull. A lot of the same names here, but we did use the same core wrestlers, which were like your CJ Banks, your Zach Gibsons, Dylan Roberts, Babyface Pitbull, Pyro. We used a lot of unknown names, if you like, that eventually became household BWP names. And as I said at the beginning of this interview, that was always one of our strengths, was that we would not always, we would bring in the imports. We'd bring the imports in, of course, as and when needed and when we could afford to. But it was always building, developing what we already had there. And that seemed to, when I look at the finances of the business, particularly BWP, that was brought in. Our most money wasn't always the imports. It was when we were putting on, for example, the Alpha Gen. The Alpha Gen, which is like the new rookie division. But they're not so much rookies these days. It's, for the up and coming stars to have a full platform for them to go and perform on, not just the occasional match here or a dark match, or just working on the carnival outdoor shows where they get a full show with full matches, main events included, where these young raw talent come and showcase exactly what they're capable of. And those sort of shows and those sort of wrestlers have always proved financially viable and more profitable for as a company. But personally, it was more fun. It was more fun to work with talent like that than it is the established TV guys, where you're literally paying over the odds for somebody that's established on TV. Therefore, the fans that have come to watch that established TV talents know what their trademark moves are, what their sets are, and that's all they want to see. They want to see them hit their big moves just to get the pops, and that's it. And that's great. That's great. But there's more satisfaction that comes from seeing a young Dougie Matthews or a young Jack Griffiths that starts off where the fans first walk out. The fans like, "Who's this kid?" And then 2 or 3 shows down the line, they come in with fan signs with those lads' names on it, and they're cheering for them strong all night long. There's more personal satisfaction for me to experience that.
Do you think because they're local to the crowd, the attachment? Would you say it's to do with that you're making the sales, the ticket sales?
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've always been fortunate to have some good names come out of like the North Wales region. So obviously that was always predominantly our area, was North Wales. But then the younger talent or newer talents or lesser known talents that would come from Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Stoke-on-Trent, Birmingham, and they would still get just a good reaction, because I think the audience, or the North Wales audience, or the Britannia audience, latch on. They see or sense straight away that this kid's got something here. So let's give him the benefit of doubt. Let's just roll. He may not be perfect. He may be making screwing up from time to time. I mean, that may be obvious because the fans are a lot smarter these days. They know what they're looking out for. But we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt because historically, Britannia have always done well with the young raw talents. Even guys like Drill, as you mentioned before. When Drill came to me, he was a one-dimensional character that only ever played one role for one company. And he came to me and we gave him one of the best storylines the BWP have ever done, The League of Violence, where he was one of the henchmen for a character called Danzig. And then from there, I could see the fans were latching on to Drill a little bit. And whilst nobody else could see this, I knew that he had face inside him. I knew he was a baby face, or he could be a baby face. And I think even Drill doubted me a little bit, but we ran with it. And then he became one of the, if not the popular babyface that we had for a number of years. And he built and he developed his own babyface persona and took that out to other promotions. And that's when he became Northern Bruiser, the heavyweight Drill. Don Micho is another guy that only really worked for 1, maybe 2 shows, including his own promotion, which was Future Shock Wrestling. Quite one-dimensional. And he came to us and we built on a character that he'd already begun to establish. And we built it up and just took it in a slightly different direction. And from there, he became a catchweight champion in Britannia and one of the biggest heels that we've ever had. So yeah, you know, it's always fun working with these characters, and then like with Drill in particular, when you see something in a character like Drill that they possibly can't see. You know, I'm not saying I'm always right or always wrong. But on this one instance, I was completely right because he got a whole number of years out of this big, over-the-top babyface character and a bloke that looks like he could literally rip your head off your shoulders.
In terms, obviously, we've gone through talents, international talents, local talents. Which talent got away that you would have liked to book when you were promoting and owning? Who would you have liked to have booked?
Okay, this is more Michael Holland. So Mike Holland, a.k.a. DJ King, will always remind everybody, whether they're listening or not, or care or not, he likes to tell the story, that before Generico, before Sami Zayn, we got offered Kevin Steen. And at the time, he was relatively affordable. I wouldn't say cheap, but affordable. And I back then wasn't really into the indie scene at all. I was WWE through and through. That was it. WWE, maybe a little bit of WCW, maybe a little bit of TNA, and a little bit of what's the other one? WWE, TNA, ECW. But ultimately, I was a hardcore WWE guy. I had no idea who Kevin Steen was, no idea. So I said no. And then when the idea of El Generico came up, I actually got showed a few video clips of him. I liked the mask. I liked the audience interaction. He wasn't the world's biggest guy. I kind of liked some of his moves he used to hit because he had some similar moves to what I used to be able to pull off in my younger days. So I was like, yeah, go on, we'll go with Generico. And then a couple of years later, if that, or whenever it was, Steen got hired by WWE and got rebranded as Kevin Owens. And then from that day, I was always reminded, and I still am reminded to this day, by Michael Holland, DJ King, of how much of a dick I was for not taking Kevin Steen when he was something like 2. So that's the one that got away, I suppose.
He's a great guy. I've met him a couple of times. Absolutely brilliant.
What I see him on TV, I've only grown to know him as an NXT WWE guy. What a character, what a wrestler, and what a character that guy is.
I know belts. I know sometimes a character supersedes a belt, but I love him when he's got a belt around his waist, you know. And I think they've cocked up a couple of angles and stuff with him in more recent times. I know he's had Rollins and that, but there's more to come. There's more to come with him, but I do prefer.
I think they've got to do something with Owens, or he will be one of these that leads through frustration and heads elsewhere.
I like the fact that he can flip from face to heel as well. That's the ultimate accomplishment, isn't it? When you can do both.
I know he has been compared quite a lot to Steve Austin, Stone Cold, and obviously he's using the stunner finish now as well. And just his general attitude and character is very Austin-esque, if you like. Whilst having his own completely unique twist to it as well. He's not a rip-off of Austin. He could just be compared to being somewhat like Steve Austin. And Austin was very much the same, wasn't he? You know, he was an out-and-out heel, but people cheered him as a face. But he was still always a heel. You know, he's always the baddest guy on the roster, but people just love that. And I think that's what people like about characters like Kevin Owens, where he's a tweener. He's one of those that he can be a face and do bad shit, or he can be a heel and still get the sympathy or the empathy both from the fans because of the respect elements. No, I do like Kevin Owens. But like I said, they've got to do something with him of significance very, very soon, or I can see that he is one of these guys that will go and take contracts elsewhere just for his own personal satisfaction.
I think the rosters are too big, my personal opinion. There's too many. And also, I think there's too many hours of content there. I know they're stipulated by advertising revenue, though, with Raw and stuff, but I'm a firm believer that there should be less hours and less talent, but that's just a personal opinion. Yours might differ to mine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually sit and watch. It's very rare I sit and watch WWE now. I mean, I'm subscribed to the WWE Network. I do keep an eye on the results on a Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings. I go on Facebook, check out the highlights, and if anything stands out, I may sit and watch that match. I do watch certain pay-per-views, so I'll certainly watch the Rumble. That's my favourite pay-per-view. And I'll certainly watch Mania and SummerSlam. I think maybe because they're the ones I used to watch as a child, they're the only ones available. And now and then, don't get me wrong, if it's a big standout match that I really want to, or I'm intrigued in or interested in, I'll make time to sit and watch that as well. But I do know what you mean. They've got WWE Raw, they've got SmackDown, they've got NXT. They've disbanded 205 Live, I believe. So some of their guys have moved over to Raw, SmackDown, or NXT. They've integrated the 205 title into NXT. It's now the Cruiserweight title. They've got a lot of great talent, and the problem is, it's okay having a lot of talent, but when you've got so many great talents, not everybody can be on top. And not everybody can be involved in a top storyline, because then your shows become too storyline driven and not enough action. It's about finding that compromise. Me personally, what I thought they were going to do after they had was it Evolution or Revolution pay-per-view?
Evolution.
I thought after that they would have a female-only brand, which would allow more time and more space for the males on Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. But it'd also mean that the female workers on Raw, SmackDown, and NXT won't be quite as watered down, because they always seem to struggle to fill the 30-woman Rumble every year. That's why they have to bring back so many old-school wrestlers to do that, or a couple of new faces that are put in the Rumble, and then you might not see them for a few months after that until they're ready to go to NXT or Raw or SmackDown. Well, if they're struggling to fill a Rumble, how are they going to really give a strong sense of the women's movements on 3 watered-down brands when they have so many male talent, top male talent on all 3 brands, that their focus isn't necessarily on the males, but on when it comes to numbers and you've got more males than females, naturally males are going to get more TV time, which again holds the females back. I think that they're in such a position now where they can actually have their own female weekly TV show.
That's cool. Just extending about the women's matches and stuff. Did you see this year's WrestleMania?
I did.
A boneyard match. Fantastic, incredible, perfect for Taker to bow out. But has he bowed out? I'm still sceptical. However, Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte was my match of the 2 nights. I thought it was so well done. It was the best. It was the best match for me, hands down. And it was in amongst some great matches. But what was your thoughts on WrestleMania? I know it's like 4 months ago now.
I enjoyed it. It was a bit different. Well, it was a lot different. Let's be honest, it was a lot different. But I thought they did really well with it. I thought the Boneyard match, I know there's mixed reviews on that, but I think ultimately it's more positive. I think a great way to send out a legend. If he has gone, what a way to go. If he hasn't gone, what a way for him to revive yet another side of his character, ready for one last match. Would they have hinted at The Undertaker being present during the ladder match when they had to go up Titan Towers and AJ opened the door and there was the whatever it was, the urn or whatever it was that was in there? Would they have done that if The Undertaker was really gone, or will there be the last WrestleMania match with AJ Styles, where Undertaker now has had over 12 months, or will have had over 12 months, from the time he filmed the Boneyard match before WrestleMania up until next WrestleMania for him to get into peak shape? We saw through the documentary that he did that with a little bit of time, or a lot of time, and patience and hard work, he can get himself into ring shape for one match, for one decent match. So given over 12 months, with the high that he must have coming off the Boneyard match and off the back of that documentary as well, and all these public appearances now making as Mark Calloway, this must be giving him a bit of a buzz. I think they may be gearing up to one last WrestleMania match next year with AJ Styles, and then he'll bow out. Because I also think Undertaker's been very open in the past about the Montreal Screwjob and how he disagreed with the way it went down, but Bret had a job to do. And when you're leaving a company, you always do the job. You always do the job for the next person in line. Now, AJ's not a young pup, but God, can he still go. And he's got as many years in him as his body allows him to have. I think if The Undertaker's going to go, he's going to insist on going, having put over somebody like AJ Styles. I don't think The Undertaker would go out on his own accord on top, unless it was somebody like Vince or Trips insisted that he went out, but I don't think he'd allow that to happen. So I think he's got one more left in him. But ultimately, back to WrestleMania. WrestleMania, I thought, it was different. It wasn't the same. Of course it wasn't. But they did the best and probably made a massive financial loss in the process as well. But the other thing I liked is how they finished one night with the Boneyard and they finished the other night with the Firefly Funhouse. How messed up was that? But it was completely unique.
Yeah.
Never like that before. Probably won't see anything quite that wacky again. But it was really, and I admit I sat and watched I watched WrestleMania once. I've sat and watched the Boneyard match twice, and I've watched the Firefly Funhouse match twice as well. That's how good I thought they were.
Who would you tip within WWE to be a future champion, to be the top dog, maybe in the next, 2 or 3 years? Who'd you like to watch with? I know you don't watch it all the time.
Yeah, I don't watch it all the time, but I do try and stay up to date without watching it. I simply don't have the time to watch it. I suppose it goes back to there's too many WWE hours on every week.
Yeah.
And obviously, real life takes over. From the guys that I've seen, I would think I'd like to see Kevin Owens. Yeah, I'd like to see. I reckon Kevin Owens could have a real good run there. I think there's other characters that will be long-term characters, like the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, or the variations of that. I like very much the way they're going, where it's a bit like Mick Foley, where which version of Bray Wyatt we're getting this week, and every version's a completely different version to the other. I like that. I think that's got legs for many, many years, and not necessarily something that needs to be in the title run either. I think Seth Rollins I like how he's changed his character. Obviously, he's a very, very strong in-ring wrestler anyway, but and I'm trying to forget the name of the guy. He's one of the members of the Street Profits.
It's not Dawkins, and it's gone. It's the name. I know what you mean, though. It's
you know what I mean?
Bianca Belair's husband. I can't think of it.
Bits and bobs of him backstage. Great on the stick. I've seen him in the ring.
Montez Ford, sorry, I jumped in. Montez Ford, got it. It's gone. It's come in.
I think he has got superstar written all over him. I don't know what it is about him. I just, from the bits and bobs I've seen in ring and backstage, he's an all-round entertainer and athlete. I think he's fantastic. Female-wise, which is nice to actually say here now, I think Steph Nixon Newell, as I know her.
Yeah.
She has had so much bad luck before getting into WWE, during the process of getting into WWE and whilst in WWE or NXT. She has so much bad luck physically, but I know her personally. She is an amazing, wonderful person, a real good person, and she works her arse off. She always has done from day one. She works her arse off. She had one of her first outdoor. It may be her first outside booking from a training school with Britannia Wrestling a number of years ago. And I know now she's really smashing it up on NXT. Mm-hmm. Her name just seems dropping up everywhere, and I think she deserves it. And I think she's going to actually be the top female face in the company. And another Brit as well, again with another BWP connection, Zach Gibson. Now I know he's part of the tag team, the Grizzled Young Veterans, and James Drake is another great wrestler. But there's something about Zach, and I think he was just getting into the NXT stage as well before this lockdown. So he's on, he's on a bit of a hiatus at the moment. But I hope they bring him back. I think they will. They'd be daft not to. And when he gets back, if he is allowed free reign, as some of the NXT guys seem to be allowed, NXT are in for a treat with Zach Gibson. And I think he's got world champion written all over him.
The Americans make me laugh, though, because I'm like, have you seen the Grizzled Young Vets? I don't know how much NXT they actually watch. I said there'd be no, especially on the domestic circuit, Europe, they're still like unaware of him, but they've had some exposure. They've had some exposure to Sax. The Yanks need to, take note, and be when it all comes back to normal. I think, as you say, but him on his own, as you say, I think absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, he's been. I think Zach started working for me about, I want to say late 2009. I think it was like September 2009. He started working for me, and at the time he was a skinny kid with long surfer hair, with baggy pleather yellow pants. But even then, when you could see there was nothing of him physically, nothing at all, you could see that he was a very talented and driven, a very young, driven human being. And then over the years, he started bulking himself up, started getting out there to different training schools, different promotions, travelling abroad, getting as much experience as possibly can. And he was also very humble about it, never an ego. And he always believed, and he had, again, I won't go into too much detail. You want to try and get Zach on the podcast. He always believed, even after he had so many knockbacks from WWE trials, and it was always, you're this close, just go and do this, then come back. And he'd go and do it, come back, and he'd be like, you're this close now, just go and do this. And he stuck with it. And then he finally got his dream contract and became WWE NXT UK Tag Team Champions. And now he's hopefully still employed by WWE NXT over in the States. And nobody deserves it more than that lad does. Very proud of him.
I want to go back to you, actually. We're going to go back in time. I know I was going to do it chronological. How was it promoting and being, you were obviously full-time wrestling at that point. You weren't semi-retired. How was it balancing the two? Just to go back to you, because the episode's about you, predominantly.
It didn't balance at all. That's why I stopped doing it. I tried for a while, and I enjoyed it. But then it was getting to the stage where the shows were getting bigger, the storylines were running longer, the fans were getting more involved. And I always remember going back to Denby Town Hall, and I had a match, I believe that it was a show where I was picking up the catchweight strap against Dean McManus, so it may have been the other way around, whatever. There was a strap involved in a singles match with me and Dean McManus. And he was trying to grab me all night. Sax, 2 minutes for me to sort this out. Sax, I was like, yeah, just 2 minutes ago to sort this out. I need to go sort out the lights. I need to sort out the audio or whatever. And he grabbed me again 20 minutes later. Sax, please, we need to sort the match on. We're on in half an hour. I'm like, yeah, look, I'll do it for 2 minutes. I'm just going to go sort this out and I'll sort that out. And it just got to the point where a minute before the match, I was like, look, we'll start like this, run like this. We'll have to just call it out there. And we did. And I prefer working on the fly. I prefer agreeing how we're starting a match, ending a match, and we'll read the audience while we're out there and we'll just call it on the fly. I like working that way. But Dean at this time was in his very early 20s. He come fresh out of the training school and he wasn't used to working like that. So the match was okay, but it could have been a lot better. And it's then at the end of the match when I shook hands with Dean, very nice, humble guy, good friend of mine. But I could see the disappointment on his face because it mattered to him more about his match than it did to me at that stage in my life and my career. And it was then I made the conscious decision that I was going to step away from the wrestling side so I could focus more on the promoting. But also, it wasn't fair on the wrestlers that I was booking myself with because I was holding them back because I was focusing too much of my time and attention on the actual show. So yeah, I think it was around about 2013, 14 maybe that I stepped away and said, well, that's me done now. Obviously, I dip my toe back in the water every now and then.
Yeah.
Since then, it always seems to be death matches. For some reason, I just get dragged into these stupid-ass death matches where my last one was coming up to 4 years ago against Danzig in Denby Town Hall, and I'm still getting over that now. I've still got a dodgy knee from that.
Are you a fan of Extreme?
Yes.
You are a fan? Oh, right, okay. I thought you were
am.
like a straight wrestling match, you know.
No, well, it depends on the circumstances. I fan of the Extreme because I think anybody that was a fan during the mid to late 90s when it was the Attitude Era, I wasn't really into ECW. I thought that was extreme for the sake of extreme, whereas WWE was extreme, but it was in context. It was relative to the storyline and the individuals pulling off the extreme measures. I am a fan of TNT Wrestling, Jay Apt's show over in Liverpool. I'm a big fan of that because it's niche. It's quite unique for this country to have something like that. It's nice when I did go from watching Britannia shows or Pro Wrestling PU shows or Wrestle Island show, whatever shows I used to go and see or watch online, to then go and sit in an all-adult environment and watch some of my good friends kick 7 shades of shit out of each other, whilst I can enjoy a beer as well. I think that's fun. I think that's fantastic. I think it's absolutely amazing. So I think Extreme, I'm a big fan of, as long as it's within context. Starting bell rings and then 2 guys just knock crap out of each other with steel chairs for 5 minutes. There's nothing enjoyable about that. But if there's a slow build in a match or a storyline where it's gradually building and building to get more and more intense to the point where the only other place you can go is extreme, is to go hardcore. That's when I'm like, yes, this makes sense. This is what wrestling's all about. It can fit within wrestling. It does fit within wrestling, but sometimes it gets abused within wrestling as well. And I think Jay Apt is, at first, not as much. It's extreme for the sake of being extreme. But I think over the last few years, Jay's really found his feet within his own market, his very niche market, where he's now able to offer character development, storylines, something for the family, but with extreme when it needs to be extreme.
I was in attendance for Drew Parker versus BT Gunn for the Extreme title, and Drew did a dive off the balcony. And it was crazy, man. It was crazy. But yeah, I like normal matches with a bit of extreme, but not too much myself. But personal preference. Define extreme. Yeah. Extreme does not have to involve tables, ladders, chairs, glass tubes, drawing pins. Sometimes extreme can just literally be where you got 2 proper brawlers, proper fighters that are literally just knocking their living crap out of each other. And sometimes that can be far more extreme than whacking somebody over the head with a steel chair or a light tube. Context. I want to go back into, we touched upon it, the Alpha Gen. How proud are you? Obviously, there's a lot of lads from North Wales, lads in northwest of England as well. I just find it, every character is different, they're diverse, they've got their own style. How gratifying is it seeing the response to the Alpha Gen, and most notably the performers in it, and how proud of them are you?
I'm very proud of every single one of them, because although we as a company took a chance in them, they took a chance on us as well. They invested their time and attention to becoming the first alphas of the Alpha Gen, and they were tagged with that name. So if the Alpha Gen had gone wrong, that could have gone a little bit wrong for them as well. Fortunately, it didn't, because just over 12 months ago now, we had a first ever Alpha Gen 8-man tournament to crown the first ever champion. That ended up being Jack Griffiths. What a show. Of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows at BWP that I've put on over the years, that was probably one of my top 5. And it was a bunch of unknown kids, 8 unknown kids over 3 rounds on one evening, and they actually smashed it out of the park. And then every show after that, they got better and better. The crowds got bigger and bigger. The confidence grew, and it was really humbling and satisfying to see that, to witness that, to be backstage, going from a locker room full of modern day old guard, I suppose, mixed with some imports. The difference between that locker room to a locker room full of lads and females that they were hungry for it, and they saw this as a golden opportunity to not just get on the show, but to own a show, to have a show named after them, after their division. The lads, like I said, Jack Griffiths, Mike Douglas, Dougie Matthews, the Pirate Prince, Joey Marcus, Chase Alexander, JJ Webb, Big Joe Bolton, and I know I've missed a load off there, but there's so many of them, and everyone comes in and they give 100%. And it's just the way they look at you, and they're listening to you, and they're like sponges, and they're taking every bit of information, and you can see them kind of nodding in agreement with you, and then you can see the cogs going in the head, and it's like, right, go and sort your stuff out, and you can see, right, go. And they come back, and when you see them, what they're delivering in the ring, you can see that they've paid attention to what you've been suggesting, what you've been advising. No, we didn't really tell them to do anything. That goes against the ethos of the Alpha Gen. Wasn't that we were going to tell you what to do. We're going to give you a proving ground for you to go out there, a platform, a venue, a live audience, and a lot of marketing behind you, a machine that's already established. We're going to pull that behind you. The rest is now down to you. You'll either fail or you'll succeed. And every one of them took that on the chin and went out there and made sure that they didn't fail. I'm not saying every one of them succeeded, but not a single one of them have failed. And I am very, very, that's probably, within wrestling, that's probably my greatest achievements is the Alpha Gen. And that's one that I was very, very proud to hand over to the new owners of Britannia Wrestling Promotion. I just hope that they do well by it, which I'm sure they will. I'm confident that they will.
Alex Ferguson did it with kids at Man United. So if you're going to attribute it to a wrestling thing, that's what I would say anyway. That was my analogy. Right, this segment is Sax's Tips. That's what the title is, subtitle, subheading. And it's just like, what advice would you give to a young person, Joe Blogg, say, and they're starting training as a wrestler? That's my first question to you for Sax's Tips.
Okay, do your homework. Which I'm not going to get into too much, but with recent goings on within the British wrestling industry, there's been a lot of changes, and there will be a lot of changes to the training schools, the way they run, the way that they conducted, and there's a lot of training schools out there. Do your research. If you've got a training school 5 minutes down the road that's only £5 to go and train, but there's nothing in place for safeguarding, there's no real trainers or professionals working for that one, but you can go 20 miles away and spend £10, go 20 miles away. If it means you're getting a safe working environment, trained by professionals that have experience and knowledge of our industry and how our industry works, and has contacts within the industry to progress you even further, it's worth spending the extra time and money going to be trained by professionals. In North Wales alone, I know of 3 training schools. 2 of them are reputable ones, one not so much. If you were living over in Anglesey, per se, sure, you could travel a couple of miles and get to this training school relatively quick. Or you could spend an extra hour, an extra tenner, and go and be trained over in Rill at the North Wales Wrestling Dojo, or Connors Key at the Basics Wrestling School. It's going to cost you more, but you're going to get much more out of it. And you're going to be safer. That's the key thing in wrestling, is to be safe always. So yeah, do your research, do your history, ask around. Social media is there for a reason. It's good and bad, but for things like this, you put a question like that, where's the best place to train in whatever area you're from, on one of the local wrestling forums, you'll get good, honest feedback from there. So yeah, for your own sakes, put some research into it.
Question 2. Said person wants to set up a wrestling company. Tips being an owner and a promoter. That's the second part.
Okay. The UK is a big place. For us, it's a big place. There's a lot of wrestling promotions about, but there are also a lot of places that haven't got wrestling communities or wrestling promotions or venues. If you're going to do it, look around. Don't tread on toes. Not like I did. Now, it worked out for me, but this is going back 13 years ago when there were nowhere near the amount of wrestling promotions, nowhere near the amount of wrestling schools around as there are today. Don't tread on toes. Be respectful. If you let's say you live in Stoke-on-Trent, where I was born, if you live in Stoke-on-Trent and you know that there's another promotion that runs one part of Stoke, there's another promotion that runs the other part of Stoke. Stoke's a big old place. Speak to those promoters. Let them know of your intentions. Be an open book. Do your research. Don't tread on toes. Don't piss people off before you even ring that first bell. And do a bit of research into it as well, because it's not as easy as just getting a ring, getting a venue, and putting on the show. You've got insurance to pay for. You need to be booking talent that you can trust, that are not going to rip you off, they're going to put on a good show. They're going to make sure that you are safeguarded, that your fans are safeguarded. There's a lot to look into. But I implore anybody, no, my opinion's changed over the years. And I'll say this on an open forum, because I've had the conversation privately and publicly about this person. But Pete Blackham from Wrestle Island, when I first saw him and saw that he was running a wrestling show and naming a wrestling show after his favourite TV show, Lost, which just happens to be my favourite TV show too, and the whole Wrestle Island thing was a reference to the whole Lost storyline and theme, and he'd never done a day's training. He was a wrestling fan and he wanted to run a show in Birkenhead, which wasn't that far away from North Wales. I scoffed at that, and I scoffed at him, and he was just another mark with all the gear and no idea. That's what I thought. And as time went on, I have openly said, and I've privately said, and I'll say once again, that I was wrong. I was wrong about Pete. I was wrong about his intentions for getting into the wrestling business. And he has got one of the most family-friendly shows in the Northwest, if not the whole of the UK now. And it's something that he's very proud of, and he should be very proud of. And I'm kind of proud of him for doing that, and for proving me wrong. So everybody deserves a chance. The beauty of wrestling is, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what gender you are, doesn't matter what size, what your athletic ability is like, doesn't matter what your background, your education's like, none of that matters. Wrestling has an opportunity and a place for everybody. And don't let anybody hold you back. If I'd listened to the likes of the All-Stars, if I'd listened to the likes of Orig Williams in the first hour of our conversation, I wouldn't be here now. If you want to do it, find a way, do your research, be respectful, don't tread on toes, but for God's sake, try, because you will regret it for the rest of your life if you do not try.
Sound advice. Thank you for sharing that. Sax's tips, little segment there. Right, just something a bit current. Seeing that you put out that the Isaac's Wrestling Podcast is returning.
Yes.
So give us the scoop, man. Give us the scoop. Give us some information about the return, if you will.
Have you listened to any of my podcasts, Stewie?
Yeah, over the years, I have. Yeah, with said promoter, 5 Star Wrestling, which I knew from afar was never going to work, but you did brilliant. You did superb with that.
I think. So the Isaac's podcast is one that is a little bit different from other wrestling podcasts, particularly British wrestling podcasts, because I approach the topics that other people kind of shy away from, or most people shy away from, and for understandable reasons. Very wise man once said, controversy creates cash. Now, I'm not in this necessarily just to make cash. I'm in this because I find it so hard to step away from the wrestling business. And I enjoy doing the podcast. And now that I've stepped away from promotion, I've now got a bit more time to actually focus on doing the podcast side. My podcasts are a little bit controversial. I ask the questions that nobody else wants to ask. And if I don't get the answer, I will push and I'll push and I'll push until the point where, much like the 5-star wrestling interview that I did with Daniel Hinkle, I push until the point where they snap and they get too honest with me. And they tend to regret that after. But then there's a little bit more transparency and honesty in the world of British wrestling, which I think now more than ever we need. We need more transparency. We need more honesty. There's still people within our little business, our little world of British wrestling that are still here that shouldn't be here. There's still a few buttons in the net that we're going to have to shake out, and I fully intend to find out who those buttons are. But that's just one side of it. There's also people that I want to have, genuine people that I'm interested in, like going back to Keith Myatt, CJ Banks, Marty Jones, Johnny Saints. These are just some of the names that I've got lined up for future episodes. People that have still got stories to tell for different reasons and different areas of British wrestling. So yeah, I want to bring it back. Keeps me busy. I hate not having things to do. Hate it. Yes, I've got a very busy professional life. I've got a busy family life. I've got a busy social life. But I can't quite give up the wrestling life, not just yet. So I've got a few other projects which you will start hearing about in the coming weeks. Interesting things I've got coming up, little projects. But the ISACs is what I'm throwing myself into for now. And I've also got a new co-anchor as well. So it's not just going to be my voice you're going to be hearing, and my guest voice you're going to be hearing somebody else. But I'm going to keep that bit kayfabe just for now.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Respect that answer. What about Sax at the Sink, though? Because that was very, very good, you know.
And you know what? The amount of people, and not just in the wrestling world, locals in my pub that say, when you're bringing back Sax at the Sink, it started off when I was a single parent with 3 kids, and my little girl was just starting going into a play group for 3 hours a day. I had 3 hours to myself, and literally all I had to do was clean up. So I thought I'd give this Facebook Live gimmick a go. It was new back then, didn't really know what it was about, but I'd give it a go, and I'd just literally be washing the dishes whilst I'm answering questions and having a bit of banter with whoever was online. And then it became requested, and it's like, well, it gets to the point where nearly every time I turned the tap on to wash the dishes, it got to the point where I'd save dishes to wash based on the length of the Sax at the Sink live feed that I was going to do. I'd actually stockpiled dishes, so I had enough to wash whilst I was doing the live feed. And then the problem came that just over 2 years ago, I moved into a bigger house, and we got a dishwasher for the first time. So I've got no dishes to wash anymore, so that was the end of the Sax at the Sink. So that's where the iSax podcast is going to picking up after Sax. What a legacy.
Sorry, I cut in then. What was the most views you had on that? What totaled the most when you were doing them? Can you remember?
On me?
Yeah.
It was something absolutely ridiculous. It was like, I don't know, 800-900. Literally, what man in Pennyford, North Wales, stood washing his dirty cups and plates whilst talking about what happened on the previous night's Raw or whatever. Insane.
I think if
I did it because I had nothing to do in that time, but clearly a lot of people had too much time on their hands because they would sit and watch and ask for Sax at the Sink to take place.
I wonder if you put it across, like you did it through StreamYard, say, and it was on Twitch, and you had it across more platforms. I wonder how many views you would have got there.
Yeah. Maybe that's one for the future.
Right, my last question now. In relation to a dream card, but I just want you to pick, like, I'm just trying to think with BWP. You had the BWP title, didn't you?
Yep.
Champion of Wales and the tag belts. Yep. Just like those 3 matches, dream card. And you can pick whoever you like.
With the tag titles, I'm going to stick with British talents. I would say I would love to see the Grizzled Young Veterans versus, you know what, the Dogs of War, the babyface Pitbull and Dave Faulkner. Pitbull's been around forever, but he's a legit hot man. Oh, and congratulations, Pitbull. Became a daddy for the first time.
Great news.
Austin. But Pitbull and Faulkner ex-UFC, both obviously MMA fighters. They look the part, they act the part, they sound the part. The Grizzled Young Veterans, they do exactly what they say. They're grizzled, they're young, they're veterans. So I think GYV versus the Dogs of War would be an amazing match. So that's what I do for the the PWI tag titles, the Catchweight Championship. Jack Griffiths and Matt Fox. A proper, old school mat wrestling match, grappling match that could also add a little bit of flair in there as well. And hard hitting. I know both of those boys they don't like to see daylight between their punches. So I'd definitely go for the Championship of Wales. The catchweight title, definitely the best in Britain, in my opinion. Dylan Roberts against Will Ospreay. I think that match would be the match of the year in any promotion, in any company in Britain. Will Ospreay and Dylan Roberts.
That's your dream card then?
Be my dream card. All Brits.
Yeah, that's sound right. Sax, hit us up with the socials where the people, the listeners, the viewers, everyone can find you. All your handles. If you know your handles, sometimes people don't.
It won't say that. Trust me. On Facebook, it's Steve Saxon. On Twitter, it's @InSaxWeTrust. And that's it for now. I'm just in the process of setting up a new YouTube account, which will be for the ISAX podcast, where all the old episodes of the podcast will be uploaded for free to YouTube. Moving forward with all ISAX podcast episodes, they will also be streamed completely free on YouTube, as well as platforms like iTunes and Spreaker. But YouTube's going to be the main focal point of it all. So keep an eye on my Twitter handle and my Facebook account for all updates about the ISAX podcast, which will be the first relaunch episode will be going live within the next 2 weeks maximum.
Okay. My guest on Stu's Wrestling Podcast today, former owner, promoter of BWP, Britannia Wrestling Promotions, ambassador for Pro Wrestling International. Have I got it?
That's it.
Right. ISAX Wrestling Podcast, the host of that, and the publican manager of the Red Lion in Pennyforth. There we go. I thought I'd just get them all in to close out, mate. Thanks for coming on today, Stu's Wrestling Podcast. Thank you very much.
No, it's been great. Thanks for having me, man.
Big thank you to 3210s for their track Sonar in the intro and the outro for today's show. Cheers, boys, for letting me use it. Big thank you to Mike Angus for the show intro, as always. Superb. Chris Dutton, thank you very much for editing once again. Appreciate it, buddy. And also to Lee, who does my website. Lee puts the stuff up on the website. Without you guys, I'd be screwed. So once again, as always, appreciate everything you do for me and the time you spend doing the things you do for me. It means a lot, guys.